With the conclusion of the first Damocles conclave, Thaddeus Shock and Valentin du Bastal spent some time on Agrellan, discussing how they should proceed. They were both senior inquisitors with a great deal of influence. Both belonged to more politically inclined members of the Inquisition. Out of all members of the conclave, they spent the most time among high society of the Imperium, solving their problems, uniting or splitting political factions, judging the sinful and the faithless. Bastal, as Lord Inquisitor, was responsible for coordinating much of the inquisitorial bureaucracy and organizations in the region. He rarely investigated or dealt with threats to the Imperium personally, unless they were of a grave nature. He had multiple acolytes, interrogators, and old pupils who were already inquisitors to take care of that. No, he was keeping an eye on much of the Crusade sector and the entirety of the northern part of Damocles Sector. Keeping eye on the big picture, looking into grand conspiracies that could threaten an entire sector, nor just a system or a subsector. To the annoyance of the Lord Inquisitor, shortly after the conclusion of the conclave, worrying messages reached him. Dominion of Iron Warriors in the neighboring Darkspire sector, thought to be destroyed by the Great Orc War over 2 centuries ago, managed to endure, or was recaptured. Incoming reports weren't clear on that point. What was clear that Prime Gala, the world that was their capital, was under the Iron Warriors' control. These were terrible news. Almost 2.5 centuries prior, traitor to the Imperium and member of the Iron Warriors, the self-proclaimed Lord Admiral Vain was forced to crash land on Prime Gala in his Grand Cruiser Merciless Spite, after his fleet was decimated by forces of Battlefleet Darkspire. Prime Gala was a feudal world colonized by knights of House Tyrant. High King Don Tross, second cousin to the King of Volantris, rode out with over 20 knights to deal death to the traitors. They were all killed by twisted, warped machines made by Vain's warpsmiths. With the only defenders of the world laying dead, the cursed traitor took over the world, transforming it into his new base of operations. At the news of their kin's death, House Terran responded, trying to defeat the mad servant of darkness. They sent over 40 of their knights and rallied support of multiple mercenary groups and gained support of few guard regiments for the invasion. Treachery was their undoing. Morrowind rogue trader dynasty, who graciously offered to transport imperial forces to Prime Gala, turned traitor, delivering all loyalists their knights, machines and weapons as offering to Vain, who welcomed them with open arms and granted a position on his council. Lord Captain Valtorian Morrowind, the self-obsessed heretic, was rewarded for his treachery with the title of Lord Admiral as Vain was now something far more than that. Soon additional traitor forces arrived in the region, seeing secured foothold, strong fortifications, and competent fleet as a great opportunity. They all bent the knee and offered their services to the Tyrant of the Desecrated Throne and Lord of the Iron Marshes. Vain the Desecrator became a new Chaos Lord and established a new dominion within Loyalist space. Dominion he began to expand. The conflict soon gained a name: the Desecration Wars. World after world fell to the Iron Warriors and their traitor allies. Warbands of Word Bearers, Death Guard, World Eaters, and other traitor Astartes knelt before the Tyrant. Pirates, heretics, and traitors of all kinds kissed his banner, seeking a chance to bleed loyal servants of the Emperor. And Vain used them to expand his domain, manipulating each and every one of them to serve his grand design. Forces of Dark Spire Sector were being pushed back by the main thrust of his forces. Tyrant Sector struggled to hold the border after enduring a major war barely a half-century before. Soon his forces reached Astvar System, which guarded the major navigable lane into Crusade Sector. A chapter of Adeptus Astartes, Star Executioners, sons of Robutel Guilliman, guarded that gate, alongside the local order of Adeptas Sororitas, Daughters of Strife, and Imperial Guard regiments of Void Owls. Those forces were impressive on their own, even more so together, but even this force called for reinforcements as the enemy reached their walls. Agents of the Word Bearers spread heresy and rebellion within their own ranks. Death Guard brought plague after plague. Servants of Khorne launched raid after brutal raid. Chaos Sorcerers summoned the Neverborn from every nightmare into every shadow. Yet, the High Command of Crusade Sector refused to send reinforcements again and again. Not out of spite, but because they were in the middle of their own war. The Veiled Shadow Crusade was a devastating conflict in the west and north of the sector. As it would turn out, a minor craft world called Arif Kildor was traveling by Cruce's western border. Eldar leadership sent agents causing rebellions and uprising to divert Imperial attention, only to be spotted by one lucky patrol, which led to a great hunt. As Battlefleet Cruces prepared to take down the Craftworld, an alliance of Eldar corsairs, calling themselves the Midnight Conclave, attacked from northwest. Soon after, entire colonies started to go missing, as Drukhari Blooded Thorn Cabal joined the fray. A hunt turned into a series of wars, and then a desperate crusade to save Cruces from the xenos incursions. The calls of Astvar System couldn't be answered, for there were no forces to spare. Worst of all, just when fighting was at its height, Bast's world, located not far from the core of a sector, was taken over by an unidentified traitor Astartes. Some thought it was Alpha Legion warband, others that it was a renegade chapter. To this day, no clear record remains. It was another threat that diverted attention from the desperate plight of Astvar. Bastal remembered this period well. It was then when he secured enough recognition to become Lord Inquisitor. It was then when he became a legend among his peers. In the late stage of the Crusade, he led the Imperial Navy in the moment of triumph, when they destroyed the Arif Kaldor craftworld. The cursed behemoth, breaking apart under the concentrated firepower of the Navy, rogue trader houses, and Crimson Dragon's Astartes fleet, he managed to rally under his direction. He chased after the survivors, but they managed to slip into a massive webway portal. He washed the bitter taste of their escape with the order to open fire on the gate. He still smiled at the memory of a broken craftworld and ruined webway gate. The taint of the xenos that plagued the sector for over 2 decades was finally getting purged out of existence. After this major victory, he redirected the Imperial forces and sat on the war council that brought an end to the Drukhari and Corsair threats in the north. But even as he was dealing with the xenos, the servants of chaos advanced, and Star Executioners bled as they held the line. There was a moment of hope when Dark Angel's strike force reached Bast's world and brought a swift end to the traitors. Many had hoped they would answer steadily more desperate calls for support from Star Executioners. But they didn't. They left when their task was done, without saying a word. And as the gates of Astvar began to break, as the forces of Darkspire Sector struggled to hold the tide of the traitors, salvation and damnation came in great green form. Wag Orkstorm, as it would be later called, came out of nowhere and without explanation. A great Wa fell upon the Iron Warrior's domain. The expansion of Chaos forces ceased at once, as Tyrant moved his assets to keep his domain safe. Just as Imperium commanders felt relief, Orcs arrived, replacing one threat with the other. Soon they reached Astvar system. Servants of the Emperor were already battered and bloodied, but they declared they would hold the line. No matter what, they would hold the line. With the craftworld destroyed, Corsairs in disarray, and Drukhari on the run, Chapter Master Aurelian Verga of the Crimson Dragons, who was now overall commander of the Crusade, led all available Imperial forces to the rescue of Astvar system and Star Executioners. They arrived to the image of Grand Orc invasion. Repurposed asteroids and vessels made of scrap dominated the sensors. Wrecks of a navy and Astartes ships floated dead and silent in the void. Laughter of a green-skinned menace echoed through the comms. But the defenders of Astvar were still holding the line. Or what was left of it. The combined might of Imperial Navy, Astartes, and even Mechanicus fleets broke the Orc invasion in a savage assault, with battle barge of Crimson Dragons, Draconis Aeternum, the Eternal Dragon, personally destroying Orc dreadnought that led Greenskin fleet. A ground assault followed. The skies darkened under the rain of drop pods, gunships, and attack craft of all shapes and sizes. Reinforcements finally arrived. Bastal was there, on Haina, moon of Astvar Prime, when dust settled. War against the cursed Eldari lasted 23 years, finishing off Corsairs and Drukhari another 2. 25 years of constant war. 25 years through which Star Executioners held the line, held the gates of the Crusade sector. Pirates, heretics, traitors, Chaos Marines, Chaos Knights, plagues, and even demon incursions couldn't break them. Orcs nearly did. 219 years ago, he stood in the smoldering ruin of their chapter monastery, the Astral Bastion, Star Executioners, a chapter of proud lineage of Robute Guilliman, once 1,000 marines strong, were reduced to merely 51 brothers. 51 Astartes. If the Emperor didn't guide their navigators that day, if they arrived even an hour later, the chapter would be nothing more than a memory. They could barely stand. They ran out of ammunition hours ago. They fought with anything they could, protecting a single chamber, the Gene Steed Vault. In the face of total defeat, Star Executioners abandoned all pride. Banners and relics were worthless in the face of death of a chapter. But their bloodline would endure. Their gene seed would be used to either revive a chapter or create a new one. By the Emperor's grace, it didn't come to that. Star Executioners endured long enough for salvation to arrive. They held the line. It was also the day when Bastal met Thaddeus Shock, a relatively young Inquisitor at only 2 centuries of age at that point. He operated on Astvar for past 22 years, fighting against heretics and demons, seeking any site of corruption and keeping the planet free of chaos taint as best he could. For 22 years, he was on Astvar War Council, helping however he could, making sure that the system would hold, no matter what. He would fail without faithful guard regiments of Void Owls, local Sororitas Order of Daughters of Strife, and of course, the sacrifice of Star Executioners. As newly anointed Lord Inquisitor, Bastal pulled some strings, ensuring that Astvar wouldn't need to pay its tithes for a time, so they could rebuild. He also used his authority to make sure that Star Executioners wouldn't be disbanded, despite their devastating losses. Nor would they need to pay their tithe in gene seed to ensure they could rebuild quickly to full strength. Finally, after a quarter of a century, the war was over. With the might of battlefield cruises and supporting Astartes elements, the Orc War was broken at Astvar, remains of Orcs' forces retreating to continue to ravage the former domain of Iron Warriors, taking over the majority of Fallow Reach subsector. Imperium's forces were spent, so they allowed Orcs to take over, sure that Iron Warriors met their end under the Green Tide. A cordon was established, new trade lanes mapped, fortress walls raised, and Orc threat was contained with nothing but an occasional raid or incursion every few decades for the last 2 centuries. Fallow Reach became an annoyance and a bitter memory. And now it turned out that them greenskins did a sloppy job. The Tyrant of the Desecrated Throne still lived, and he was making moves to take back his domain. Just as the Imperium created a cordon to keep themselves safe from Orcs, Vayne used Orcs as a cordon to keep himself and the core of his domain hidden from the Imperium. And now, for whatever reason, he felt confident enough to start expanding once again, enough to be noticed. This threat had to be dealt with, and quickly. A crusade against the wretched Tau breed xenos wouldn't get much in terms of support as long as the Tyrant sat on the Desecrated Throne of Prime Gala. The threat of the Iron Warriors couldn't be ignored, nor what horrors they could have created in 2 centuries Imperium gave them to prepare. Even more importantly, neither House Terran nor elite forces located in Astvar's system would send even one soul to fight against the Xenos before Vayne was dealt with. Many more governors and administrators would be reluctant in sending any forces when their own territories were in danger. Bastal and Shulk agreed to work together and take care of the damned traitors before they could become a bigger threat. Valentin du Bastal will coordinate with his counterpart in Darkspire Sector, sending his agents to people of interest to gather support. Thaddeus Shulk would take a role of a diplomat, meeting with many of those people personally. 4 of those were more important of all. Patriarch Roland Terran, the current head of a Night House. Almaric Lati, Chapter Master of Star Executioners. Canoness Superior Elara Venistra of Daughters of Strife. And Lady Protector Maris Alendra Cordain of Astvar. If those 4 agree to work together, Iron Warriors' shattered domain won't have a chance to recover and become a threat. And luck would have it that Thaddeus Shulk knew each and every one of them personally. Shulk traveled to Voltores first. It was a short jump from Agrilan. He arrived officially without hiding his identity, causing distress among many. Many but not Patriarch Roland, who welcomed him with open arms and great respect. Thaddeus Shock was a known witch hunter and a friend to now long dead Patriarch Alaric, father to Roland. Current king grew up listening to tales about how the righteous Inquisitor and knights of House Tyrant crushed heretical rebellions and achieved a number of victories. One could say that Thaddeus was almost like an uncle to the old king. The welcoming feast stretched into the night, and old pilots exchanged stories, Thaddeus himself speaking of those victories he could talk about. The worries of nobles that Inquisitor came for them faded away in the river of alcohol and tales of glory. Unnecessary delay. The sun was starting to rise when Thaddeus, Patriarch Roland, and his son, Cassian, met in the royal office and spoke privately. Thaddeus allowed himself to feel sorrow when joy slowly faded from the eyes of Patriarch, being replaced with righteous rage and desire for revenge. Roland was born but a year before the start of the Veiled Shadow Crusade and the Desecration Wars. He grew up on Voltoris, rarely seeing his father, who spent the majority of his childhood on the front lines. He trained eagerly and bonded with a knight at 18 years old, 2 years earlier than tradition of House Tyrant dictated. He joined his father on the front line and suffered losses because of his eagerness and lack of experience. It was in those last 7 years of war that Roland developed into orthodox and by-the-book knight commander to atone for his foolishness and rash actions. He was there by the side of his father when they reached what remained of Star Executioners. There he met Thaddeus Shock, one of the heroes who held the line for almost as long as he was alive. Roland never accepted the loss of Prime Gala. The world belonged to House Tyrant, not accursed traitors. But even though he felt burning rage in his heart, he wasn't a fool. He knew how House Tyrant attempted to rush to deal the killing blow, only to be betrayed. He knew how Tyrant endured multiple counter-offensives, only to strike twice as hard at the Imperium. The monarch silenced his fury and asked what Inquisition wished from House Tyrant. Only then did Shock spoke of the Tau and their growing threat, the plans for the crusade against them, and how Vain the Desecrator would make those plans hard to accomplish. Roland listened to his old friend and agreed that this new xenos threat had to be dealt with, especially seeing how dangerously close to Voltoris they were. But he also agreed he wouldn't put his support behind such campaign as long as Vain was alive. Many people of power had to work together to make Imperial machine to move at acceptable pace. With that in mind, High Patriarch Roland turned to his son, Cassian, to travel alongside Thaddeus Shock to Astvar, to meet with the local leadership and do what he can to help with pushing the powerful of a sector into a war against Vayne. Thaddeus were grateful for that. Roland was many things, but he was no diplomat. His son, however, had talent for diplomacy. He understood nuances of conflict and compromise, unlike his unyielding and orthodox father. Inquisitor quietly thanked the Emperor that for all his faults he granted Roland wisdom in his old age. With his father's blessing and clear goal in mind, Cassian traveled alongside Thaddeus all the way to Astvar, with astropathic message reaching the system a few weeks before their own arrival. The moment they did, they received a message from Lady Protector Maris Alendra Cordain, inviting them to her capital city of Valorghast on Astvar Prime. As their vessel parked in orbit, Thaddeus could look down onto the world. Once a civilized world of boundless, harsh beauty, now a fortress world. A young fortress world, all things considered, but still a fortress. They descended from high orbit, flying towards the Citadel of Martyrs, the greatest fortified structure on the planet's surface, with no less but 12 anti-orbital cannons surrounding the core of the Citadel in 2 great rings. Much has changed since the Desecration Wars. They were welcomed by servants and guided to a great command hall deep within the fortress. The many people of power were already waiting for them. Lady Protector Maris Alendra Cordain of Astvar was a tall and imposing figure despite her age. She carried herself with a regal of a royal and an officer both. She wore a long coat, adorned with symbols of the Void Owls, Astvar, and her dynasty. Her attire was practical, yet refined, blending military and civilian styles, reflecting her role as both protector and provider of her people. Her silver hair was braided and clear for all to see. She was not ashamed of her age. Her green eyes were just as keen as when she was but a child, assessing every detail with the sharpness of an owl. She was accompanied by a handful of aides, with only one being worth of mention. Commissar General Vaylin Cormac stood by Lady Protector's side, observing everything with his cold, piercing eyes. It was clear he wasn't here to look for signs of heresy or doubt in the lady, but everyone else. His dark hair was kept cropped short, his face was one of sharp features. He wore modified Void Owl's uniform, rarely wearing commissar's cap or even traditional coat. By the looks of it, Vaylin went native. His left arm was hidden behind a black gauntlet, hiding a cybernetic prosthetic that was a constant reminder of his past mistakes. A power sword and bolt pistol hung from his belt, ready to be used at a moment's notice. Canoness Superior Elara Venistra of Duchess of Strife was visibly taller than most mortals. Even her power armor which shared colors with Star Executioners, was clearly bigger than standard armors worn by Sisters of Battle. Even though she was the youngest of all gathered and her face was beautiful, she wore more than a few faint scars and marks of cybernetic enhancements. Her dark black hair was worn in practical braided style. What stood out were her eyes, storm grey, reflecting her determination and wisdom that is rare in a person that young. Her magnificent power armor shared colors with the Star Executioners, blue and red, with left arm painted black. She stood by the side of an angel of death and her adoptive father. Almaric Lati, chapter master of Star Executioners, stood in attentive silence, an image of proud son of Robute Gilliman and of Astvar. His face was that of chiseled scars and grim experience. His deep black hair and beard had strings of silver, despite his relatively young age for the Astartes. His green eyes were full of focus, but weren't unkind. His armor was a master-crafted wonder, with engraved prayers to the God Emperor and promises of vengeance and retribution. Thaddeus Shoak, even though just a mortal, walked into that room with unwavering confidence. Not merely because the power of his office, but also because he was the oldest and most experienced person in the room. Even Almaric, slightly over 3 centuries old, was at least a century younger than Thaddeus. Above all, however, he knew them all. He remembered when Almaric was but a sergeant, who rose to the position of a captain of the 8th and later 3rd Company during the Desecration Wars. He was there when he was elected to be the chapter master and witnessed his sweeping changes he did to his chapter. He remembered when Lady Protector Maris Alendra Cordain of Astvar was known as Princess Maris Cordain. Just a teen when he first met her at the start of the conflict. Mature woman and one of the few surviving members of the House Cordain by the end of it. He saw how all the dreams and hopes of the young girl were transformed into bitter determination. Commissar General Veiling Cormac could thank him for his current position directly. It was when Thaddeus called for the Void Owls to help him with his mission 3 years ago. It was Cormac who answered, and who for his service to the Inquisition gained the title of Commissar General. Even the youngest of them all, Canoness Superior Elara Venistra, served for a time under his command. He noted her talents and potential. He quietly recommended her for a position of successor of her predecessor, and it seemed that his words weren't ignored. Thaddeus stopped, looking at them in silence, waiting. And as one, they bowed their heads. He returned the gesture and greeted each of them personally, speaking to them like an old member of a family, checking on the younger generation. Love wasn't something Inquisitors could easily afford. But Thaddeus Shock loved them. Loved Astvar and these people who represented its loyalty and power. In the galaxy of so many horrors, Astvar, which endured so much, gave him hope. Hope that no matter what, Imperium will endure. He began to speak, bringing the news of Vayne and the fact he survived. The burning fury in the eyes of all present almost ignited the air. Yet none spoke. They listened. Thaddeus continued, explaining the plan, explaining how Lord Inquisitor Dubastal was making moves, how leaders from Darkspire and Acteron already received messages. The vision of great coordinated strike from no less but 3 sectors. And then he spoke about the other threat, the Tau, the xenos empire that grew right under their noses, one that started to secure entire subsectors and sought to expand even further. He spoke how the threat of Vayne was ignored or underestimated for years before it was too late. How much could have been saved if Imperium reacted in time. He presented the plan. First, they needed to destroy Vayne. Then, they needed to turn their forces and bring an end to the Tau Empire in one devastating strike. 2 great campaigns. 2 crusades. One against old enemy. One against new. Neither would succeed without sons and daughters of Astvar. Then he asked them if they would place their support behind Damocles Conclave, Lord Inquisitor Valentin Dubastal, and himself. Lady Protector looked through the window onto her world. She spoke about dreams of her father she listened to when she was but a girl, about Astvar becoming a trading hub, a gem known in the entire segmentum. Vayne broke that dream. Now her world was a bitter fortress. She was there when dream of her father was bulldozed over so that new fortifications could be raised. For the sake of a righteous vengeance, the retribution for all that was lost, she would put her voice behind Lord Inquisitor. Cormac nodded his head in agreement. He would pull some strings within Commissariat and in Schola Progenium. Neither the traitor nor Xeno wretch could be allowed to live. Void Owls would answer the call. New regiments will be raised, trained and equipped for the coming war. First, retribution, then genocide. Elara Venistra looked up to her adoptive father before placing a hand on him. As she promised before, she will stand with him, no matter where he will go. Almaric Lati, Chapter Master, the Great Reformer. Father not only to Elara, but to executioners as a whole, spoke about his darkest moments. The Desecration Wars, the death of his brothers, his captain, his mentor, his chapter master. His eyes burned with a righteous rage as he spoke. The executioners will answer the call of Lord Inquisitor. They will call in all favors, contact all allies, old and new. He would not rest, not before he will take Tyrant's head himself. Cassian Terran listened to all of it intently and spoke only after last syllable of Lati's words dissipated. Prime Gala was a colony of his house. His house failed to defeat Vain when he crash-landed on that world. His house failed to see the treachery and deception of Valtorian Marrowin. And it was Astfar that paid the price. House Terran will do all to bring Vine down, to seek redemption for their weakness and blindness in the dark hour. Knights of House Terran and all who call them allies will walk by the side of sons and daughters of Astfar, if they will allow them to do so. There was a moment of silence after that declaration. Almaric himself walked over, watching Cassian with his piercing eyes, seeking even a note of deception. He found none. Sons and daughters of Astfar accepted the offer of sons and daughters of Voltoris. They would walk into the fires of war side by side. With this agreement in place, more things moved into motion. Valentin Dubastal contacted his allies and even rivals, seeking to create united front. Thaddeus Shouk, Prince Cassian, and representatives of Astfar became potent tools in his hands, making contact with many people in power throughout the Crusade sector. Gathering of support and forces went mostly smoothly outside of a small conflict in Nexus Realm, which Antarian Arraign took part in. Star Executioners and Daughters of Strife dealt with this problem with bolter, blade, and fire. Even though they couldn't point to a direct connection, Valentin Dubastal decided to frame Alpha Legion's operations as something they did either as part of some deal with the Tyrant Vain, or they did it to support him on their own volition. You can never be sure while dealing with members of the Alpha Legion. Lord Inquisitor also managed to establish contact with two other Lord Inquisitors from nearby sectors. Lord Inquisitor Gideon Akrutus of the Darkspire sector and Lord Inquisitor Valeria Thorn of the Acteron sector. Gideon was of Ordo Malleus and was old enough to witness desecration wars that were far harsher on his sector than Crucis sector. Valeria was of Ordo Xenos and was mostly dealing with Eldar and many unnamed species that lived on the edge of the galaxy. She was old enough to remember desecration wars, even if Vain never pushed far into her sector. Orcs who took over his domain, however, were pain in her side for some time now. It was rare for multiple Inquisitors to meet. Meeting between 3 Lord Inquisitors was beyond rare. A situation when people of such influence agreed with one another was unimaginable to most. And yet, they agreed on something that day. There won't be a repeat of Desecration Wars. And if war goes well, Darkspire and Acheron will offer some of their forces to purge the Damocles Sector from xenos taint. They reached an agreement that each sector will organize their own force with their own commander. One commander for each direction of attack. But what they also needed was overall commander of a crusade. Out of all candidates, the one presented by Dubastal was seen as the best choice for both this and next campaign. Gideon von Raven was relatively young but excellent commander. He gained renown in Segmentum Ultima and was respected in all 3 sectors. He was known for his deep faith in the God Emperor, not only as the deity of humanity, but also as Omnissiah. He belonged to one of accepted cults that merged 2 faiths together in somewhat understanding way. He had good relations with Mechanicus, faced against a number of foes of the Imperium, and took part in one genocide in Darkspire Sector. He would be responsible for keeping leaders of each sector crusading forces in check and focused on one goal, and when the time comes, with all the strings they were pulling, he will be named a War Master for upcoming Damocles Gulf Crusade. With their agreement in place and strings pulled, all 3 sectors started gathering forces to bring end to the Tyrant of a Desecrated Throne. Imperial Guard, Sisters of Battle, Skitari Legions, Night Houses, Titan Legions, all answered the call to bring the righteous retribution upon the Xeno, traitor, and heretic alike. Campaign known as Ironfall Crusade will soon scour the Fallow Reach subsector of all xenos and heretical taint. Forces of the Imperium gathered en masse would show the wretched Iron Warriors to not underestimate the might of the Imperium. Dubastal knew true joy, feeling the power of the Imperium on his fingertips. And then the message arrived. Otfar didn't disappoint him. He gathered a lot of valuable information and captured an ethereal. Good. Valentin called for 2 representatives from other Lord Inquisitors to take part in the second Damocles Conclave. And then he made his way to Agrellan. So many pieces were already on the move. So many assets. The war against Vain and his traitorous kind was a blessing from the Emperor himself. Once mobilized, Imperial forces didn't like being idle, and thankfully he had just a right target for them to take care of, the moment Vain's head hits the ground. As he sat in his office on board of Grand Cruiser Wrath of Mankind, he truly felt that he was part of that wrath, his wrath. And is there a greater gift Emperor gave to humanity than his wrath?